biggest whoa moments I ever had so far was thanks to Bill Nye, Chief Executive of the Planetary Society. He talked about how pretty much every of the estimated 200 billion stars only in our galaxy has its own planetary system with its own planets. Some only host one, others dozens. Some share the planetary system with other stars. Some, like ours, are the only bright and glamorous, glorious center of the planetary system. For me, it opened up my mind in the thought about extraterrestrial life, even if it might only be on the microbiological level. But then it came to me, stars bring life to the universe, but not because the light they radiate, because of what they are and what they do. Our planet Earth orbits our sun in the so-called Goldilocks zone, meaning it is at the right distance to the star that is our sun, to have a moderate temperature, far enough to be protected from high energy radiation, and in a pretty stable orbit. Many believe that the sun is responsible for creating life on Earth. The sunlight allows plants to conduct photosynthesis, which produces oxygen that allows us to breathe. We eat plants and some do eat animals, to have enough energy to keep our bodies working. But interestingly, that is not the best way to maintain life on the planet. As MIT researcher Manolis Callas talks about, the easiest way to create life is underwater. Deep underwater there is a consistent environment, high pressure, protection against cosmic rays, and more than enough heat energy produced by black smokers, volcanic rifts that spit out magma and release immense amounts of energy into the water. The same idea supports the hypothesis that life exists on the Jupiter moon Europa, which is covered by a thick layer of ice, beneath which is a vast ocean covering the entire moon. But there's another reason why stars are so important in our universe for life. It is not necessarily the most intuitive idea of sunlight or heat, but rather elements. Stars are cosmic forges that create various different elements in their core through hydrogen fusion. You know that thing with Thor having gotten his hammer Mjolnir and his new axe Stormbreaker from a literal forge built around a dying star? You'd be surprised how accurate that actually is. Probably the most accurate thing in the entire Marvel universe when it comes to physics. Stars produced literally every element that created the planets in the entire universe. From simple things like carbon and silicon through fusion in the core of a star, to metals like gold and palladium, which actually is a real element that get created when a star goes supernova. There are in fact just two types of elements in the universe. The ones made by stars going all the way up to uranium, and then there are 24 synthetic human-made elements that do not naturally occur. Think about that. There are literally only two sources of elements in the entire universe: stars and humans. It is crazy that we as a species literally created elements that otherwise did not exist in the entire universe. So I guess ancient civilizations were not that wrong considering the sun as the highest god in their religion. And there are quite a few crazy stories about the sun, both religious and scientific. My favorite by far is the story about the sun god Ra. I had a fascination for the ancient Egypt since I traveled to the Valley of the Kings in modern Egypt near Luxor and the Temple of Amun-Re. For the ancient Egyptians, having lived near the equator, the sun was one of the most powerful things they ever experienced. They could clearly see the connection between the hot temperatures in the Egyptian desert, the Sahara, and the intense sun rays drying all open lakes, ponds, and even rivers. For prehistoric civilization, it is to expect that they conclude that the sun must be a higher entity, powerful enough to decide over life and death. And so was born the myth about the sun god Ra, carrying the sun disk on his head. As the Egyptians used boats to carry heavy goods either from city to city or from plantation to city, they concluded that Ra was sailing through the sky every day in a solar boat. But as humans developed and started studying the universe, they came across a problem. They assumed, under the premise that the sun is not a god, that the sun somehow must be producing immense amounts of light and heat, and they weren't that far off. We know today that heat and light are the same thing, electromagnetic waves. But the idea remains the same. And the only thing that humans knew at that time that could produce a lot of heat and light was coal. In the 19th century, scientists concluded that the sun, if not a god, must be a huge ball of coal. And no, I'm not making this up. Scientific American published an article in August 1863 under the title "Experts Doubt the Sun is Actually Burning Coal." It says, if the sun were composed of coal, it would last at the present rate only 5,000 years. The sun in all probability is not a burning, but an incandescent body. Its light is rather that of a glowing molten metal than that of a burning furnace. But it is impossible that the sun should constantly be giving out heat without either losing heat or being supplied with new fuel. Assuming that the heat of the sun has been kept up by meteoric bodies falling into it, it is possible from the mass of the solar system to determine approximately the period during which the sun has shone. The limits lie between 100 millions and 400 millions of years. We now know that the sun actually has a life cycle of about 9 billion years. It was born roughly 4.57 billion years ago and will run out of fuel in about another 4 billion years. And guess who suggested that the sun is actually converting mass into energy through nuclear reactions? Of course, it was Albert Einstein. To be fair, his hypothesis, which turned out to be correct, was based on the idea of Rutherford, who proposed that the sun is fueled by radioactive decay. The main prize, though, this time goes to the two other scientists, and not Einstein. In the 1930s, Beth and Chandrasekhar worked out the theoretical concept that the sun is not fueled by nuclear fission, but rather nuclear fusion. You actually might have heard of Chandrasekhar before. The Chandra X-ray Observatory is named after him. And you know what's funny? Even though Chandrasekhar won the sun nuclear fusion thing over Einstein, the Chandra X-ray Observatory just recently proved an effect called gravitational redshift that was predicted by the man himself, Albert Einstein. There are so many amazing things about stars. Just consider that you are entirely made out of the remains of a dying star who went into a glamorous and beautiful supernova. If that isn't an entrance, I don't know what is. In this video, I talked a bit more about the historic ideas and myths. As the universe is still today baffling to many of us, it seems obvious that many tales rank around galaxies, stars, and universes. So I decided to start the first poll on my Patreon that allowed patrons to decide if you want to see more about prehistoric science and myths that revolve around the sun and our cosmos, or if we should go more into the deep science of stellar nuclear fusion and a supernova. You might have heard the news from MIT that their new concept for a nuclear fusion reactor looks promising. I think it would be interesting to explore this topic in one of the future videos. Let me know in the comments. And as always, you can find some extra cool stuff on my Patreon. You can start supporting this channel from $1 a month. It would be much appreciated and allow me to spend more time working on these videos.